Hey y'all, hey y'all, hey y'all, hey y'all. Good afternoon and welcome to the first not for sale conversation about human trafficking. Y'all see I'm rocking my not for sale wristband today. If you ain't got yours, make sure you hit up Ania and get you one. I'm Miss Joni for everybody who doesn't know me. And I'm here today, and my only responsibility is to introduce you all to your guide and your host today. 18-year-old Ania McNair. She's the visionary behind Not For Sale. Her passion to fight against the horrible and disgusting culture of human trafficking has led her to start a youth owned, youth led business tackling this dark issue. And that business is called Not For Sale. Ania is a senior at Reginald F. Lewis High School right here in Baltimore, a member of the Healing Youth Alliance, which is a youth-led initiative to address youth and mental health. And of course, she's a Heart Smiles Heartbeat. I mean, duh. For all youth who are tuned in today, please let this be an example of what's possible when you follow your dreams, set your goals, and relentlessly pursue success. I'm so proud and so honored to present to you the founder and CEO of Not For Sale, Ania McNair. Welcome, Ania. What's up, y'all? I see y'all. Hey, King Core. Hey, Breezy. Hey, Miss Caitlin. Ania's coming on here, y'all. We just got to let her pop up. She right here, though. Hey, Yo Yo. Hey, Jessica. There she go. There she go. Now
Hey,
I can quietly fade into the background. Welcome, Ania. Thank you so much for doing this. Not for sale today.
yes, I see the wristband.
I'm out.
See. All right, guys, how y'all doing? So, good afternoon. So, my name is Ania McNair, as Miss Joni said, and this is Not For Sale. And Not For Sale is a youth led organization that spreads awareness on human trafficking. We want everyone to know that we believe that every child and youth is worth protecting. No one should be going through that traumatic situation. And this is why we're here today. We have guest speakers from University of Maryland School of Social Work, Black Mental Health Alliance, and also Baltimore City Police Department and Department of Juvenile Services. And I also have my team here today. And so my team, as you know, Zion, Mar, Lene, and Zion, and Naeem. So we are all part of Not For Sale. And so I'm gonna let them introduce themselves.
I can go. Hey everyone, I'm Zion. I'm 16.
My name, Naeem Maddox. I'm 15.
Hey, my name is Mark Knox and I'm 18.
Hey everyone, my name is Lene and I'm 15 years old.
Okay, so as a brief introduction on what Not For Sale is and how it got started. So I don't know if y'all remembered, I did a Thriving Thursday one time and I came on and talked about human trafficking. And so it seemed like it caught a lot of y'all interest. And so I wanted to do more about it. So this is how Not For Sale got created. Miss Joni created a grant opportunity that she posted on her story. And so I applied and Miss Emma and Miss Mo helped me out through this process. And it was a long journey. I'm not even going to hold you. But throughout this journey, it taught me a whole lot of lessons for me and my team and how we should work together. And we got the grant, and the grant was 11,500, and we got fully funded. So I am really happy that everyone came out and supported this event. This is our first event in 2021. And I'm really happy for all of us and for all the youth that are interested in human trafficking and want to help spread awareness on it. So I'm gonna introduce our next guest. Many of you know her, and I am glad to introduce her. So her name is Dr. K. That's what we call her, and she's from University of Maryland School of Social Work. And so she's also a part of Healing Youth Alliance, and I'm a part of Healing Youth Alliance. And so I'm glad to introduce her to y'all today. So Dr. K.
Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see you all, and I look forward to this conference and to learning with you all and presenting. And I also have excellent news that a national expert on human trafficking will be joining us, Dr. Nadine Carr-Finnegan, and she will be able to offer some of her expertise on this important topic as well. Ms. Ania, did you want the presentation to start now, or are we just doing introductions?
You can start the presentation.
Okay, all right. So part of what I am here to talk about is really the impact of trauma on people, especially young people. Because many times when people think about human trafficking, they think about statistics, or they think about, right when it's happening. But what's also really important to understand is that there are lifelong effects that happen because of the experience of human trafficking. And so I will share my screen so that I can give you all some information just to be aware of what some of the long-term impact can look like, as well as by age, because sometimes people think, well, human trafficking may be just for older teenagers, but it actually can happen at a very young age. I've had clients as young as 4 years old who were trafficked by their mother. And so it's important to recognize what the trauma is, as well as the impacts that it has based on age. So first I want to talk about what is trauma. So trauma is the witnessing or experiencing an event that poses real or perceived threat. And so certainly human trafficking would meet that definition, whether it be that the person themselves were trafficked and what that experience included, but it could also be witnessing somebody who you are close with or in a relationship with being trafficked. The definition really is that the experience happens, but also that the event overwhelms the person's ability to cope. So because of trauma that they've experienced, their ability to handle stress, make decisions, plan ahead, all of those things are impacted because of the trauma that they experienced. And then it makes it difficult for them to be successful in achieving goals that they set, as well as having really a lot of emotional impacts as a result of the trauma. Acute trauma. Acute trauma is a single traumatic event that is limited in time. And during an acute event, children go through a variety of feelings, thoughts, and physical reactions that are frightening. So sometimes when we talk about an acute trauma, it may be like a car accident, that everything's fine, then there's a car accident, but everything goes back to being fine. But for human trafficking, that can be a reality that it's one time, but many times it's more chronic. So chronic trauma means that there's multiple traumatic events. So the person is trafficked once and then it becomes ongoing. And so they may have multiple perpetrators. And so the effects of the trauma are cumulative, which means that it adds up. And so instead of it being like, oh, I had, 4 traumatic events, each time you experience a traumatic event, it increases the amount of effect that it has and your ability to heal from the trauma. The last category of trauma that I want to cover is the complex trauma. Complex trauma is chronic trauma which is caused by adults entrusted in the child's care. So what that means is that, as children, one of the things that children do, rightfully so, is that they look at adults as the people who are supposed to keep them safe. They're the adults who are supposed to take care of them, meet their needs, and make sure that nobody else hurts them. But when it's the adult who's supposed to be taking care of them is the person who hurts them, then it really causes a lot of interpersonal trauma, which means that now, if that's something I experienced, so for my client who was 4 and was trafficked by his mother, for the rest of his life, he didn't know whether or not he could trust people who said they love him. Because the person who said that they loved him is also the person who trafficked him. And so it really causes a lot of lifelong impact. It does not mean people can't heal from it. They can, and that's why we do the work of healing. But they have to get treatment. They have to be part of a community that can talk about these experiences and the effects. And it's really important to be able to tell the story about what happened in a way that you're not putting blame on yourself. And that's one of the things that comes up for a lot of survivors of human trafficking, is that there's a lot of self-blame. So they may say, well, it was my fault because I went with him, or it was my fault because I wore that, or it was my fault because, I was gullible. But those are all things that the perpetrators put on the survivors, and it's not the reality. The only person at fault in these situations are the traffickers, never the victims, never the survivors. And so not only can the trauma impact the child's coping mechanisms and relationships, but it can even impact the person's development and functioning. So what is a child traumatic stress? Traumatic stress overwhelms a child's ability to cope, which just means that, prior to the trauma, they may have been able to problem solve. They may have been able to be in trusting relationships with people. They may have been able to have frustration tolerance, so that if something happened, they knew how to calm down. They knew what to do, like taking a deep breath, that type of thing. But when there's traumatic stress, it means that there's been so much stress that has happened that they're no longer able to access some of those coping resources. So when I talk about this, I always think about, like a bridge over the two sides of your brain, and trauma is like water. And so when trauma happens and that water covers the bridge, then all of a sudden what you could have done before the trauma, you now have challenges doing, because the bridge that helps the communication between the two parts of the brain is covered. If it gets covered by that water once and then the water goes back down, then long-term it doesn't impact your functioning, because you're able to heal and the water has gone down. But when you have people with chronic trauma who that bridge is covered by water lots and lots and lots of times, then it makes it more difficult to heal, but not impossible. That's why the healing work is so important, because you can rebuild that bridge and be able to help heal the brain. Post-traumatic stress reactions that you might see, re-experiencing the event. And so that means that people may have nightmares. They may have what's called flashbacks, which means that they may be having a conversation and then they smell something, or they see something, or they hear something. It's usually sensory based, where all of a sudden they feel like they're back in the trauma. And so when that happens, their heart rate may go fast. They might go into fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, meaning that they're going to suddenly start, hitting and screaming and punching. Flight may be that they just get up and run off, or freeze, that they just really feel stuck and that they can't keep moving the way that they were. And so sometimes you may see all of those reactions. Then you also might see avoidance. Avoidance is if something happened at this specific place, that person doesn't want to go back to that place. Or they may say, well, I can't ever trust men again because it was a man who did this. And then hyperarousal for difficult thoughts and emotions. So that just means that you're more sensitive to, being overwhelmed by things because the trauma has impacted your ability to calm down. Traumatic events may affect a child's ability to trust others. So again, if I trusted my parent to take care of me and my parent is the one who hurt me or trafficked me, then I may have a challenge being able to connect with others. I may feel like I'm never safe anymore. And so I'm scared to go out by myself. I'm scared to go for a walk by myself. And then I may have some difficulties in navigating life changes. So, and it could be a little change, like I always take this bus. Well, after the trauma and I'm having all these challenges, then that bus isn't working. Instead of being able to say, oh, well, I'll just take this other bus, because of the impact of trauma, now I'm sort of stuck with like, well, I don't know what to do. How do I plan to take another bus? What bus do I take? And I may not feel safe taking another bus because I'm concerned that something can happen to me again. I'm going to pause there for 1 second because I'm giving lots of information. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, good. So the other thing that's important to know is that trauma really may look different in different ages of children. So when a young child experiences trauma, and young meaning from birth to middle school, and it looks different obviously for infants, but you might see nightmares. So all of a sudden they're having lots of nightmares. It doesn't mean that they're saying I'm having a nightmare of the trauma that happened. It could be that. It could also be nightmares of just scary things happening. So we also see repetitive play with traumatic themes. So you might see a child who is playing with dolls, like Barbie dolls, and reenacting a trauma that happened to them. And they get stuck and they do the same play over and over and over again. It doesn't change. So one of the kids that I worked with who had been abused, her play every single week for 2 months was of a mother abusing a baby. And she couldn't break out of it because what her brain was trying to do was understand it and try to figure out, how do I heal from this? So the work was really about helping her to be able to, in the play, talk to the mother about how this was not okay and that she shouldn't be hurting the baby. You also might see some dysregulation, so issues with when to eat, not sleeping well, being hyperactive, things like that. You also might see developmental regression. So that might look like a kid who used to be able to walk and run, and then a trauma happens and all of a sudden they stop walking and running and they just kind of crawl around on the floor. Not that they physically can't walk and run, it's that the trauma has caused a developmental regression. So some of the skills that they had have now been erased temporarily because of the trauma. You also might see like bedwetting, wetting themselves while they're awake and moving around. And it's just that the brain is so focused on the healing from trauma that the body is now regressing in some of the issues being faced. You also might see that children become more withdrawn. And so they are less likely to play with friends. They're less likely to talk to people. They seem very sad and just sort of quiet. And then on the other side, sometimes they have externalizing behavior. So that means that they are, hitting, screaming, fighting, throwing things, and really seems like behaviorally they have a lot of challenges, but it's really a reaction to the trauma. And so, unfortunately, a lot of young children who display these behaviors, they get in trouble. So instead of getting services to talk about the trauma that they experienced, they actually start getting suspended or expelled or detention or those kind of things, because they're sort of seen as being oppositional rather than understanding that this is just a reaction to the trauma that they experienced. For school age children, so again, this might be late elementary school and then middle school, you might have intrusive thoughts and images. So this might look like they're sitting in class and all of a sudden they are having flashes of memories of a trauma that they're remembering. And so they may all of a sudden sit there and just see a flash of what happened to them. And so sometimes when that happens, it means that the teacher may say, oh, you're not paying attention, you're not listening. The kid may get really scared. So they might get up and run out of the classroom, or they may hide under the table, or they just shut down and they just stop talking and they don't answer. So when the teacher is like, hey, I'm calling you, the kid is so stuck looking at that image that is flashing in their mind that it's hard for them to focus on what's going on in the classroom. They sometimes may get preoccupied with frightening moments from the traumatic experience. And so that means that the time that, like it could be the time where they saw the gun in their face, or the time that they were being chased, or the second that they realized that there was a bunch of people in the room, or whatever that moment that was the scariest, then they start just focusing on that moment and they kind of replay it like a loop in their brain. And so that's replaying the traumatic event in their mind. And they also start to think about, well, maybe if I had done this, then this wouldn't have happened to me. This was my fault because I opened the door, or this was my fault because I didn't fight 15 guys off. Again, remember, the only person at fault in the experience of human trafficking is the person who is trafficking the survivor. It is not the survivor's fault. I could walk out in the middle of the street naked and say, here I am. That does not give the right for anybody to touch me, have sex with me without my consent, and certainly not sell me to other people. So there is nothing that a survivor has ever done that causes them to be assaulted, ever, in any circumstance. There is no time that somebody has the right to touch you or sexually assault you or sell you, ever, no matter what. I think I said that clear enough, right? Okay. And then sometimes people develop intense specific new fears going back to the original trauma. So I've had people who, they met the person who trafficked them at a mall. And so after they survive the trauma and they're able to escape, they're scared to go to malls anymore because they make that connection between the mall and the assault. They sometimes will go back and forth between shy and withdrawn behaviors and then aggressive. So you may see somebody who's really quiet, they don't interact a lot, and then all of a sudden they're like, yelling and screaming and beating people up. And it's because the brain is going back and forth between this fight, flight, and freeze reaction to trauma. They can become so fearful of recurrence that they avoid previously enjoyable activities. So this might be somebody who really loved to jog, and then after the trauma, they don't feel comfortable being able to go out and jog anymore because the fear has overwhelmed them. Sometimes people have thoughts of revenge, that they're going to find this perpetrator and hurt them. And then it's not unusual to have young people experience sleep disturbance that may interfere with daytime concentration and attention. So we see that a lot of children who have had trauma are diagnosed with ADHD, not because they actually have ADHD, but it's because of the trauma that they're having problems concentrating. Okay. And thank you for sharing that, Marquis. It's not unusual. This, many young people have these experiences. So finally, the adolescence stage. In response to trauma, adolescents, so those are the teenagers, they may feel like they were weak or strange or childish or crazy because there's not enough conversations about what trauma looks like in young people. Young people aren't aware very often about what trauma looks like in young people. So when they start having these feelings and thoughts, then they think something's wrong with them, when in fact, they're just displaying typical trauma reactions. They may be embarrassed about their fears and exaggerated physical responses. So you might see a kid who startles really easily, somebody brushes against them and all of a sudden they're fighting. And so they may be embarrassed about why they're reacting that way. And they may think that they're alone in this reaction. Many times it can lead to anxiety and depression, intense anger, and low self-esteem and helplessness. I'm going to pause here for a second and see if anybody has any questions. Okay. And then it can, the influence for trauma on adolescents. These trauma reactions may in turn lead to aggressive or disruptive behaviors. And so many times in high schools, we have young people who have been suspended or expelled. And then when you sit and talk to them and say, so tell me about your history, that's where we find out, oh, well, they've experienced trauma and nobody has addressed the trauma. In fact, in Department of Social Services for children in foster care, the top 5 diagnoses are anxiety and depression, oppositional defiance, bipolar, but they don't diagnose them with post-traumatic stress disorder, but they're all in foster care. So they've all experienced trauma. So it's really it's unfortunate that so many times young people who have these behaviors are penalized or punished for it rather than getting the help that they need. Sometimes because of the trauma response, they have difficulty with sleeping. And so they may say, oh, I was just studying late, or I was watching TV or partying, but actually it was that they couldn't sleep because of their trauma response. And so they did other activities. Drug and alcohol use as a coping mechanism. So this is, I would argue, why we hear so many people, so many young people are smoking weed on a daily basis. Is they smoke weed in the morning to help them get to school because they're anxious about being in school. Then they smoke weed in the evening because they're trying to calm down and be able to go to sleep. And so they're smoking weed several times throughout the day to try to manage some of these trauma responses. The challenge is that obviously smoking weed costs money. It can prevent employment. And so, you have to think about, like, is that something that you want to do that could get in the way of your success, right? Whereas if you go into therapy and really try to work through the trauma, then you may not need anything to help you with the anxiety and the sleep issues. Some young people engage in self-harm, like cutting themselves, biting themselves, stabbing themselves with a pencil, pulling their hair. And it's a way that they feel pain throughout their whole body because of the trauma that they've experienced, because of the emotional effect. And they try to localize it by causing pain in one place so that it just hurts there instead of everywhere. There's an over or underestimation of danger. And so, not understanding that a place that you're in is probably not safe, or that a safe place you think is dangerous. And it's because the brain is still trying to figure out how to understand all of this when you've experienced trauma. And obviously expectations that you will be hurt or abandoned, and then difficulties with trust because somebody who you did trust hurt you. And so it can cause relational difficulties. And therefore there is an increased risk of victimization because you lose your trust in yourself, that you know who's safe and who's not. And so when you get a feeling like, this person doesn't feel safe, that you might ignore it because you think, well, who am I? I don't know. And so your judgment can get impacted. So thank you so much, Ms. Ania, for inviting me to present for this conference. I appreciate that. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those at this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. K. Like, that presentation was so powerful and it has so much valid information that I think everybody needed to hear. So everyone was making like real legit comments in the chat. Like, they were really into it and they learned a lot. So I really do appreciate you for coming on and giving your side of you and giving information out. I thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
So our next guest speakers will be Miss Lauren Benjamin and Miss Sherry Jones. Both of them are my mentors and they helped me with Not for Sale, and I truly do appreciate them for helping me in starting my organization. So I present to you Miss Lauren and Miss Sherry.
Hi, everyone. It's good afternoon, right? Hope everyone's having a good day thus far. Thank you for coming out. What do I do? I work for Baltimore City Police Department as a human trafficking case manager there. I work primarily with youths, as well as I have been doing some young adults. What we do is we find resources, we help them in any and every way they need help. They have my number, they can call me anytime. I go out on scenes with law enforcement and help them that way. I'll let Sherry introduce herself and then we'll go from there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherry Jones, of course, and I am the Deputy Compact Administrator for Juveniles, and I am also the ICJ Commissioner for the state of Maryland. And I have been working with the Department of Juvenile Services for 20 plus years now. And I have been advocating for children since I was 10, and that's sexually exploited children since I was 10. So I have dedicated my life to this, and I'm just glad to be here. And I'm so proud of you young people. I'm just thrilled that you all are able to do this in such a young age.
So we're gonna just talk today. We don't have a presentation, and that was purposeful because we really want to interact with the youth. I go into the schools, we talk to kids. I'm just talking to them about what they know, the signs, things they experience, because you all are out there in the world and you all see and hear and have to deal with some of the things that we don't have to deal with. So we like to have an open discussion. There's no need to be ashamed. You could ask questions. We're always willing to talk to you guys. So one of the things that I go out, I speak to kids I think I've been to like 8 or 9 schools in the city, talking to young girls and guys about, exploitation, how it can happen. We see it happens to a lot of young men, and guys don't believe it happens to them. Believe it or not, I had a whole men's group, young guys from, I think, 14 to 18 that said it can't happen to them. And why do you think it can't happen to them? And anybody can answer. Don't be shy, I promise.
I guess I can go, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
From my point of view, that's reason why most black males don't believe it happened, because it don't often happen to them. But at the same time, people don't really usually speak on it because they feel like they down bad if they speak on it or not. or if they elaborate on it. And and me as a male, I know because, you know, I heard people went through this stuff before, and I done my research. So so I think that's why, like, you know, it just don't often happen to them, or they just don't want to speak out, or they feel like, oh, they will get put on the spot if they tell them.
Do you think it's something to be ashamed of? That a lot of males feel that they will be ashamed, like people point at them and say they're weak. Because that's what that's what I heard from a lot of young males. They say, oh, they don't want to seem as a punk, or they don't want to seem weak, and nobody could take advantage of them. Sherry,
Right,
I know you have some. Go ahead.
right.
Yeah.
I was about to say, yeah, right. It's not only they going to be people going to shame them, but people going to call them gay and stuff like that. Even though that man was a victim, he couldn't do anything at that point.
Right.
So I just want, you know, males to, you know, to take notes of this, because, like I said, not it don't like I said, the only reason why they don't want to come out because it don't often happen to them.
Right.
So yeah.
And also, like what Naeem said, a lot of times young men, all the time, young men who have been victimized or victims of human trafficking don't speak out because, one, especially in in an African American community, that if that happened to you, that means now that you're a girl and that you're no longer a male, and that then you become victim of other crimes like physical crimes, and then you got the phobias when they say you're gay and you're not gay, and it's important, just like we tell girls, to tell our young men that it's not their fault and that we need to advocate for them just as strong as we advocate for girls. And I have served on a panel and talked about male sexual abuse as well as trafficking, and so it's important for males to know it's not your fault and that you are loved just like we love our females. We're going to advocate for you just as strong.
And one thing I want to, the other thing that we also have to look at, and I spoke to guys and girls about this is, and the doctor, Keela, really pointed to this is, you know, going into therapy, and especially in the African American community, going going to therapy is a little bit taboo. Can we say that? And that's a true thing, because it looks as, why should I go and tell somebody my problem? Why should I tell that person what is happening? And one of the things that we learn too at a young age is what happens at home stays at home. How
Right.
many kids were told what happens in this house stays in this house? You don't tell what's going on, and if you told, you might be taken away. And a lot of kids don't want to be taken away from their parents, and their parents, and parents are abusers, and they could be abusers. And kids don't want, that's the people that you learn to love, right? You come out of the womb loving your parents. We see all the time, because I work in child abuse, we see all the time children who their parents abuse them, and they take them out of the home and they run right back to those parents, because those are their caretakers. They want to be with them. So one of the things that we always try to talk about is, going to therapy is not, it doesn't show a sign of weakness. It shows a sign of you exploring your feelings and understanding the feelings that you have. And feelings are a thing that we all feel. We all know that we have different emotions, and that when we get to different ages, we have different things that we experience, and we know that's going on, and we don't know how to explain it. And sometimes we can't speak to to our parents or whoever is our caretakers, because they don't understand. So speaking to somebody who has this as a profession, sometimes it's better, because they give you a different perspective. Sherry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share like what I do.
Zion has a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Zion.
So Zion said, how will we know therapy worked in the long run instead of in that moment?
Would it work? That's what his question was?
Yeah, like how would therapy work in the long run instead of it being in that moment?
So, okay, so one of the things that therapists always say, because I'm a social worker by trade, right? And I'll be honest with you guys, I was like, therapy, I could exercise my problems away. I could talk to my friends. But what therapy does, it gives you a different perspective on the issue that you're dealing with. And you're going to have to figure that out with the therapist. And I don't know if the good doctor wants to jump in and say anything about therapy.
Yeah, I think that therapy can help in that moment, as you were saying. And what it does is that it teaches you long-term coping skills so that if things come up for you again, you now have those skills again. But it also helps to really address some of those things of if you feel like, well, it was my fault. Well, in therapy, we can talk about that and say, this was not your fault, and help you understand that this was not your fault and that you are a survivor. It can also help with some of those relationship issues that if you're in a new relationship, you may think, well, how do I know they won't do this to me too? Mm-hmm. And so you're able to work that through in therapy to help with your own personal healing, but also relational healing.
And then also therapy is an ongoing process. So you can get it at the initial impact of the trauma. And then later on, you might have something in your life that'll trigger where you have to go back into therapy. So it's an ongoing process. It's a never ending cycle sometimes.
And Sherry, you had a thought that you were going on before Zion. So you want to go ahead and elaborate?
No, that was the only thing I wanted to say.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought somebody else had a question. Did somebody else have a question for us?
All right, so since you're talking about, and the question was about males and males being trafficked, Naeem brought that up. So I want to give you an example of a non-delinquent. All right, so in my office, I'm responsible for processing runaways. Runaways could be accused delinquent, absconder, a straight runaway from home, meaning they're not linked to any agency. It could be a delinquent, non-delinquent. And so I want to just give you an example of a non-delinquent youth committed to the Department of Social Services and how my office was able to help coordinate his return once he was recovered at the Canadian border. Just give you a little bit of background. So this individual, he actually was befriended online by this man, and this in the older gentleman, much older gentleman, was giving him money, and they would travel from state to state and staying in hotels. And this young man made it all the way to the Canadian border where he was recovered. And he was had a history of sexual abuse, and he was a part of the sexual abuse unit with the Department of Social Services. And so once he was recovered and he had the missing persons, because that's what we process in my office. Any child in the state of Maryland, I tell you all, I bring all our babies home, whether it's a delinquent, non-delinquent, we bring them home. So when he was recovered, we processed his case. We told him that, identified and confirmed that he was wanted in Maryland and that we wanted him. So what we did was we do secure transport for those non-delinquent cases whenever they're recovered in a neighboring state. We do this as a courtesy. It's not mandatory, but this is something that I did as a protocol in my unit to ensure that trafficking victims are recovered and returned to non-abusive situations in the least amount of stress as possible. So we have a private vendor that actually go to a neighboring state, pick up the respondent or the child, non-delinquent human trafficking victim, and they actually help coordinate and have them placed in a DSS placement or return to a non-abusive relative. And so that's a male who was human trafficked. So a lot of times though, with the males, what they do is they don't process them like they process females, because it's viewed that a male should be strong enough to protect himself, but that's not the case. So that's just one example of a non-delinquent runaway case that we actually processed, and we did it successfully, and the child was able to be placed in a therapeutic group home when he returned, opposed to going into shelter. So that's what we did.
So we have a question, right? So do you want to clarify a question?
What is the question?
Mark? What kind of type of physical?
Yes. So I know, like, I always hear that like people are getting transported across the country, and I just wonder like how they even do that first, and why are we like much easier to get trafficked now that we are been taught that stay away from dangers or don't follow. I don't know, like
That's a
growing up,
good
like I always been taught like don't talk to strangers, or if they say if you want some candy, you say no and stuff like that. So why is it more easier now to get trafficked now that we're teenagers, than when we was like children? Because I know like more teenagers are getting trafficked now. As I always see.
Dr. Carl wants to break that down for you. Go ahead, Dr. Carl.
Hi, everyone. I'll get into a little bit more detail of that in a few minutes. But when it comes to the violence and the coercion, a good bit of that is not because it's actually happening more. I think it's more because you're hearing about it more.
Right.
So, like some of the stuff that I remember seeing with, people when I was growing up, I didn't realize back then was trafficking, and now we know it's trafficking. Right. So I think that's part of it. In terms of the violence and everything, the types of violence that are used to get someone into a trafficking situation is not always seen as violence. So, you might think there's a lot of violence in our communities. We know that in general, but if you think about someone who's being trafficked, if I am your trafficker, I don't want to beat you or hurt you to the point where you can't work, because if you are that level of injured, then you can't make me money. Right. So the violence and some of that, and I'll talk a little bit about it when it's my turn in a few, but the violence that is used is a form of coercion or a lot of threats, because they've already hurt you once, so that they might threaten you. They might not actually do it this time, because like I said, if you got a busted lip, nobody's going to want to pay, because how are you going to, perform a sex act on me if your mouth is jacked up? Right. So you got to think through so when it comes to the violence in our communities, yes, some of the violence, some of the structural issues in our community contribute to our risks for trafficking, but the violence necessarily isn't always physically perpetrated against people who are in the middle of a trafficking situation. So, but thanks, Lauren, for giving me a minute out of y'all time.
Oh, no
That's
problem.
all right. Thank you. And also you have to understand too, just a point, is that it's not always done by a stranger. Sometimes individuals are being trafficked by their parents. And then also you got people who build rapport with you, a coach, teacher, it could be a grandma, a godparent, and you have that relationship with them. So it's a trusting relationship, and you trusting that they have your best interests at heart, only to find out that they're being deceitful and their intent is to hurt and harm. And so and then also sometimes individuals who have a history of being sexually abused, is almost, they say it's like a target on your head to say, oh, that person's been abused, and you're more apt to be abused again. So it's like once it happened, it start happening, then it becomes repetitive. But then the therapy will help break that cycle, because then you'll be able to identify what's a healthy relationship and how to identify negative characteristics in individuals.
And remember, the other thing is, why is it so easy? Because kids have phones as young as 7, 8 years old now, right? You all have PlayStations and Xboxes and all the tablets and all these things, and we communicating with everybody, right? So the communication is there. It's easy. The other thing that we have too is people could drive. We could drive, from here to California, in a week. We could drive from here to Florida. No, people don't think about it that way. So you get in the car and you do these things. So what?
Go ahead.
You said what?
I saw Shamir.
A pimp could be anything. And Shamir could jump in and say a
Yes,
couple of
please.
things. Go ahead, Shamir.
Shamir?
I'm sorry. I'm just here for support, but I just wanted to follow up on the question that was asked about the violence.
Mhm.
There are different types of traffickers. You have your Romeo slash lover boy trafficker, which will not utilize violence to coerce their victims. You have what we call a gorilla pimp, which is your most violent type of pimp, which he don't care about, he or she doesn't care about the type of violence um that they inflict on an individual that will impact if they work or not. They don't care. I've known traffickers who've put their victims in the hospital. I've known traffickers that black and blue their victims' eyes and have them stay home for a couple of days until that swelling goes down. And I know traffickers that have beat you up and still have you go on a stage in a strip club. The violence, it really depends on the person.
Mhm.
Nowadays with the violence, it's even more because you have and and this is for me just trying to educate myself more on the mindset of traffickers, where I have watched and researched some information of how they think. And if you listen to like an old school pimp versus a new school trafficker, they will say that these nowadays trafficker, they're not following the code because there were certain rules and regulations back in the days about being a trafficker, which still doesn't make it right. And I still can't wrap my mind around it, but it's now more for show, it's now more for hype, so that violence is increasing. um and I could go on and on about that, but I just wanted to thank you guys for allowing me to say that. I'll go back on
Thank
mute.
you.
Oh, thank you, Shamir. Yeah, so you have all of these different pimps, and a pimp doesn't, it doesn't look like that pimp that you see in on the videos. A pimp could be anybody. It could be the pastor in a church. It could be a lawyer. It could be anybody. It could be a grandma, right? So you have, it's all about building that trust and that relationship. And what we find is young people are vulnerable. We all are vulnerable, right? We all are victims. We all fall into this because the reality of the situation is we want to be accepted. And young people have this need to be accepted and be wanted and be loved. And you have kids who've been traumatized since they were, 2 years old. And somebody pays them this, it could be the worst, they always say any kind of attention is better than
No.
no attention at all. So somebody's giving me a little bit of attention. Like this guy just looks at me and oh my God. And he says, "Oh, you look so beautiful today." Right? And you didn't comb your hair, you probably didn't brush your teeth, whatever, but he told you you're beautiful. That's all he had to say or she had to say. Right? That is grooming, right? And they get you to build that trust, right? And then he says, anytime your mother don't feed you, call me. Or she says, call me. If you don't have a place to stay, call me. These are some of the things that how they build these is in subtle ways. It's not grandiose things that they give to vulnerable kids. It's subtle things. You need something to eat. Think about it this way: you didn't eat in 3 days, and I told you I am going to take you to McDonald's and you can buy anything you want.
That's it. And that's how they do it. The simplest thing: food, clothes, and shelter. It's
So,
just basic needs.
all right, so we don't want to take up too much more
Nope.
time. Sherry, do you want to go and say anything else? But we love to do open discussions with young people because we think that's the only thing. Fun?
I just want to say that, and I don't believe I said that the interstate compact for juveniles is the only legal mechanism for returning of victims who has been recovered in a neighboring state. And so the interstate compact is, we have all 50 states, and DC and the Virgin Islands are party to the compact. And so I just want you to know that we are the only legal mechanism for returning runaways. And that means in a human trafficking victim falls in that category if they identified through the interstate compact process.
Okay. And I'm going to let Dr. Carr touch on the signs of human trafficking because we're running out of time and we don't want to dip into everybody's time. But thank you
That's
so
right.
much.
Thank
Thank you so much. Okay.
Whew.
Thank you so much, Miss Lauren and Miss Sherry, and for everyone who pitched into this conversation. I really feel good that everyone was engaged and everyone is learning information. So now I'm gonna present our next guest, which is Miss Nia Jones. Shout out to her because she was on WEAA the other night, and I love Faraji. So here she is. She's also from Black Mental Health Alliance. So here's Miss Nia.
Hey everybody, super excited to be here with you all. Ania and team, I'm super proud of you. You're doing things that people my age and older and even younger don't even have the guts to do, and you're going after it. So I'm inspired. I'm always in awe of all of you. So keep doing the work that you're doing. I'm not sure, did we want to answer that question that was in the chat around the signs? Or you want me to keep going?
I'm gonna cover that during my section, Nia, so keep going.
All right. So I'm talking a little bit about mental health, and you all know I'm from the Black Mental Health Alliance, so I always bring that focus for whatever training I'm in, because it is important that we talk about it. And I heard someone mention earlier, and it's very true. I feel like we're shifting a little bit in that our community is reaching out for help, and I'm so happy about it. But there are still groups of folks who are intimidated by therapy or just mistrusting of it for whatever reason. But as it has been stated, Dr. K did an amazing job as always around talking about the clinical impact of PTSD and trauma, and discussed about depression and anxiety. So no need for me to repeat what has already been so eloquently stated. But we know that mental health for individuals who are victims of human trafficking and sex trafficking experience before, during, and after things around PTSD, depression, anxiety, self-harm, attempted suicide, and have experienced physical and sexual violence a lot of times as a result. But I want to bring it a little bit closer to home, right? So I'm in Maryland. I've only ever lived in Maryland, and we are a human trafficking hotspot. Which was shocking to me when I learned of it a few years ago, in a couple of ways, right? So we have women and minors are usually the biggest target. And so the data that I did find back in 2014, there were 396 survivors that were reported into the database that Ms. Sherry was talking about earlier. And those were the ones that came in contact with the authorities. But then there's another group that I don't think we talk about as much that Dr. K mentioned earlier, and has shown up in my own family, of Black children that are trafficked for drugs, for paying of debts, for a generational curse and a lifestyle that has happened, right? So you'll hear in like passing in a lot of Black movies, well, my mama did it to me, and so I did it to you too. And so recognizing that some of this can also be within our own communities, and we don't talk about it as much. And so I wanted to lift that, and that of the 381 individuals that were sex trafficked in that data that I found, 364 were women and girls. And we know that runaway and homeless girls, or girls that are experiencing homelessness, as well as LGBTQIA young people and immigrants, are impacted. 93% are female. 87% are between the ages of 14 and 17 years old, and more than half of them are Black. And so that brought up all kinds of feelings for me as it relates to one of your questions, Ania, that you sent to me was around race and sexuality and its intersectionality. And so I think about how we talk about Black girls as being fast, or you wore something that was a little too revealing, and how we marginalize our own girls, and end up inadvertently almost pushing them out of the door. And so they may run away for whatever reason, or find, what they think is a man that's going to love them, or a woman that's going to love them. And it ends up being way more than that. And they end up at the Canadian border, for example. I also think about, the stereotypes that we attach to young people, and to Black people in general. And in the HYA training, we talk about this, how we think of Black women as Jezebels, how we think of Black men as that strong Black buck, and how they are presented in the media in that way. And so I remember a friend of mine went across seas for a semester abroad. And the men that tried to traffic her in Russia thought that, had this image of a Black woman in their mind when they were trying to take her. And so being able to undo some of those stereotypes and showing that we're not all that way, I think is one of the things that's also very inspiring about this work that you're doing, Ania and team, because you are debunking that, right? You are debunking those things that people think about us. And so I really appreciate that. Also think about the Black body. For young people between the ages of 14 and 17, your body is one of the few things that you have agency over. And so when I'm driving and I have a young person just walking across the street, taking their little precious time, I'm like, you got it, bruh. You're right. Like you got it. I'm going to let you take it, because your body is one of the things that you have, the most control over in a world that has shown you that, you're seen as dispensable, or we don't care about you. I mean, we saw that this past week with folks scaling a federal building, but that's another conversation. And so as it relates to mental health, there was another question that you sent that talked about social loafing. And it made me think about my first year in my psychology program, when we learned about something called diffusion of responsibility. And so when you see in our communities, individuals who are in, toxic relationships, individuals who are dealing with trauma, and there's a group of us, right? We travel in our friend groups, right? And if you see one of your friends struggling, or you're afraid of where they're going to go, or who they're being groomed by, or coerced for whatever reason, taking the responsibility to really have that personal connection with them. So one of the ways that we stop that from happening is really lifting something that Mr. Rowe has talked to you all about before. I've talked to you about really this concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are, right? And so looking out for your brother and sister, Black pride and, Black collective care is mental health. So we think about therapy, right? And I'm a strong advocate for it. I'm in therapy. I am a therapist. It is important. But, if you can't get to that, our community should be wrapping our arms around each other. And that is, your support system is one of the biggest things we ask about when we assess for suicidal ideation, when we talk about coping skills, support system. So that's one of the biggest things. So making sure that you care for your brother and sister, your friend, fellow human, however, you want to identify or categorize. And if you don't, take care of each other. That's the biggest one. And a lot of times we also, kind of from a mental health perspective or psychological perspective, will diffuse responsibility or socially loaf because we think we don't know, or we don't have the information. And so one of the best things about HYA is that the young people are getting the information to be able to stand in the gap and help each other as it relates to trauma and collective care and depression and anxiety, having that person there and having appropriate information. And so I think that is also worthy to be lifted in this moment. And so take account of each other's story. Your story is important, it's powerful, it's what makes you who you are, and get to know each other in that way, so that I am because we are doesn't become some quote. It becomes a way of being, it becomes a way of how you take care of each other, a way of doing. And then thinking about collective care again. So Dr. Carl Bell, I mentioned this also in past trainings, has principles of resiliency that really fit into collective care and caring for each other, especially as Black people. So restoring the village. And I think this work, Not for Sale, is a part of that. Restoring the village and having safe spaces and places to have these conversations, but also being able to have connections like Miss Sherry as a part of your group to say, all right, now that you've come back, we need to get you connected to her. So that number one, we have the data around how many of our young people are being victimized in our communities, and then we know exactly how to help them from a clinical perspective, from a legal perspective, and then from a cultural perspective. And then another thing is around helping each other to develop good self-esteem. I'm dating myself, but Cat Williams had this joke around self-esteem being esteem of self. And while it was funny, it's also not, right? Like we have a responsibility to lift each other up, to build each other, to make each other stronger. And saying, you know, I see you with the red shirt on, go ahead, Steph, right? You look good today. I'm happy to be connected to you. Those things lift confidence, lift self-esteem. And a lot of times that's one of the biggest things when clients come to me for therapy. It's really about, I don't know how I got into this space. And sometimes a part of it is around how they felt about themselves. And that's not your fault ever, right? A lot of times it's because somebody took hit after hit after hit, and then you start to believe it. And so if we work with each other in this collective care environment, it undoes that. Support from loving individuals can undo some of the effects of trauma. And so I leave you all with that today. One other thing I didn't mention was the hotspots. So just think about this, the hotspots in Baltimore City: North Avenue, Pulaski Highway, Greenmount, Coppin State University, Route 40, I-695. We travel in those areas all the time. So keep your eyes wide open, you know, be cautious about your surroundings. But one thing I know about those areas is that my young people live there. I live there, right? Like Green Mountain is in walking distance. And so again, taking care of our communities and not allowing for people that look like us and don't look like us to be in our spaces causing this kind of havoc. So I hope I didn't go too long. If there are any questions, I'm open now. I hope that's what you wanted me to do, Ania. But this is great. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Miss Nia. That was like hearing that, and like when you pointed out the different areas, and I know some of the areas, and like I know people who live in those areas, and we really do. This is why we're here today, helping youth and other people being aware on these situations so they know, hey, I can help my community and stuff like that. I don't want to hold up too much time. We have our next guest speaker. Her name is Dr. Nadine Carr. I don't know how to pronounce your middle name. I apologize. But here she is.
Hello, it's Nadine Finnegan Carr. We are all good, Ania. It is perfectly fine. I wanted to just circle back and starting with just what is trafficking, and then specifically, because it seems like most of what we're talking about is child sex trafficking, even though there is also labor trafficking, which also happens in our community. So I don't want people to think labor trafficking is only like, you know, people out working on a farm or whatever. Labor trafficking here happens right here in Baltimore City too, along with sex trafficking. But I wanted to give us a little bit of information about what it is and go into just the types and the signs and the signals, because that seems to be like people are touching on it, but I wanted to really break it down. And I want to thank Nia, you mentioned some of the numbers, and I'll touch on some of the numbers because that's literally my research, and my job is to collect those numbers. So, so like I can give you some of those as well. But so you'll have to say yes or no, okay? Because I'm assuming that most of the young people are minors under the age of 18, right? And so you don't even have to admit if you've ever had sex before. But it does not matter if you've ever had sex before. Somebody forcing you to have sex is still sex trafficking. And forcing you to have sex for money is still sex trafficking. Forcing you to have sex for shelter, for food, or whatever, it's still sex trafficking. And the reason I'm specifically pointing that out, and when I say that, I mean, it's sex trafficking under federal law, under state law, under city law. It is still sex trafficking, even if you've ever had sex before. And the reason I say that is because sometimes people will say, oh, well, she liked to sleep around anyway, so how am I supposed to know that this time was sex trafficking? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many times you've ever had sex before. None of that matters. Point blank, period. If someone forces you to have sex for something of commercial value, it is trafficking. That's it. It could be your mama, it could be your sister, it could be your brother, it could be your best friend. It could be because you end up homeless on the street and you don't have a choice. And someone says, I'll let you stay here on my couch if you sleep with me. That's still trafficking. That's still trafficking. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because what traffickers will do is they will convince you that what you're doing, you might as well do because you a hoe. And they'll start to call you those names because you were forced to do it and coerced in a way that you didn't even recognize wasn't your choice. So you get put out, you sleep on someone's couch, they force you to sleep with them that night, which is a commercial exchange. And then they say to you, I turned you out anyway. Why don't you just sleep with a couple more people and make some dollars? And so I need to break down that that's trafficking. And in the state of Maryland, child sex trafficking is a form of sexual abuse. And it doesn't matter who the person is. It's sexual abuse. Doesn't matter. Because, I know sometimes when we think of sexual abuse, we think of a family member or what have you. And I like how Nia was saying it, and Lauren said something earlier, that it could be someone you know. And yes, someone you know may be abusing you, but someone you know also may be profiting off of you. And so when we talk about trafficking and sex trafficking, we talk about different types of trafficking. So I know we got into a little bit a few minutes ago about pimp control trafficking. So y'all went into pretty good detail about pimp control trafficking. There's also gang control trafficking. Gangs quickly learned that they can sell a dime bag once. I'm gonna make $10 off of this one dime bag. If I got 10 dime bags, I made $100 that night. But once I make that $100 and I've gotten those drugs out of my hands, I ain't got nothing else to sell. That's all I got for the night. But what they've realized is if I have one girl or one guy and I can sell them 10, 20, 30 times a night, and they're selling people for much more than $10 a bag. Gangs quickly learned that being in the trafficking business is profitable. Another type of trafficking, Nia touched on it, Lauren touched on it, and that goes back to like anybody as a trafficker, is familial trafficking. So a family member can traffic you. It's that intergenerational harm that was mentioned, but there's also trafficking related to a family member that's on drugs, that sells a child to get drugs from the trafficker. And it might be that they sell that child over and over to someone to get drugs, to get money. Or it could be that they literally sell the child and you now his, or you're now hers, or you're now in the gang because I sold you to the gang so that I could get what I needed. Then there's non-pimp control trafficking. So non-pimp control trafficking is the kind of trafficking that I was talking about. Like if you end up and someone says, well, if you sleep with me, you can stay here tonight. You can't necessarily pinpoint, like it might be this person today. It might be that you end up with a crew of friends with your posse, with your girls, with your guys. Y'all all couch surfing together, and y'all take turns turning tricks to pay for what you need as a group. And you can't identify a specific person, you know, that is the pimp or the trafficker, but that's what it is. It's non-pimp controlled, but it's a form of survival. It's survival sex. And what happens is people think about it. Like I said, people, it doesn't matter if you've ever had sex, it's still trafficking, because you're literally exchanging something, a commodity. You are a minor and you have no choice. This is the only way of survival. And this is why this is becoming more noticeable in our communities, because we're naming it. Before, we used to, like I said, people would look at me like, oh, she's just a hoe. She just likes to sleep around to get what she wants. No, she's literally trying to survive. And we're pointing out that that's what it is, and people have no choice. And then the last one that I will also mention, which is sometimes a part of non-pimp control, but also can exist on its own, and that's peer-to-peer trafficking. That's your girl, your guy exploiting each other under certain circumstances. Sometimes that happens among friends. Sometimes you're in a dating relationship, or it might not actually be a real dating relationship. It might be an unhealthy relationship. And dude will say, well, if you love me, break my homeboy off a piece. You know, if you really care about me, you hook my friends up. That is also peer-to-peer trafficking, those types of situations. And I also want to mention just a little note about sexting and sending pictures and all of that stuff, because that's similar to peer-to-peer trafficking. Is sometimes, especially when you are under a certain age, a relationship lasts like that long, you send a picture to that person, your relationship breaks up, they now keep sharing that picture to say, oh, you know, look at how he busted open for me. This is what he did for me. And they send that picture around, and that picture actually becomes child pornography. And I'm just touching briefly on it. And but the reason I'm touching on it is because, as we've seen this week in this country, there is a double standard for us compared to others. And I say that because an online photo lives on forever. And that photo, if you are a Black, Indigenous, person of color, any of those, and you're a minor, you might get accused of being a sex offender for sharing that child pornography. You might have to register as a sex offender. And then that disproportionately impacts the types of scholarships you can get, the types of colleges you can go to, all of those things, because you were sharing a picture that, you know, so you're now listed as a sex offender and you weren't even thinking. So I'm that's like a little bit of an aside, but I needed to let y'all know that happens. And the reason I'm spelling it out is because it is more likely for one of us to get charged as a sex offender than someone of a lighter hue, than our white brothers and sisters, who may do the exact same thing, but get a slap on the wrist and not have to register as a sex offender and not lose their scholarships. I've seen too many Black people lose scholarships over sending a picture. So I'm just pointing that out. And it doesn't matter if when they send the picture, because I've seen this, the person is now 2021. When the pictures were sharing back and forth, they were all under 18. But because the picture is of a minor at the time, it is considered pornography. So I don't want y'all to be like, oh, I won't share that picture until I'm older. No, if the picture was taken when you were under 18, it's child pornography. So I wanted to point that out. The other thing, in terms of the risk factors, I want to touch on that real quick, because I know that was both a question, because now that I've like broken down what it is, seriously though, in terms of the risk factor, there is no one particular profile. When you're talking about child sex trafficking, child victims, you could be any socioeconomic level, any racial, ethnic background, any type of life experience. Just the fact that you are a minor, just the fact that your brain is still developing makes you at risk. Period. I know those of you who are young people right now, those of us who are not so young anymore, you could probably think of one dumb thing that you did. And even if you're a young person now, you can think back to when you were much younger, like a dumb thing that you did that you're glad that people aren't holding that against you now.
Amen.
You know? Exactly. You know, that one dumb thing, like whether it was when you were 8 years old and you did XYZ, or whether you were 17 years old and you did XYZ, and you're like, Lord, I'm glad people don't hold that against me. That developmentally, you just do dumb stuff when you're younger and you're trying to figure stuff out. It's a part of learning. And the other thing is, as a teenager, you're supposed to take risks. Like literally, you're supposed to be taking risks right now, because risks are what teach you what not to do. Everybody takes risks. When you learn to drive, your first couple of years driving, you take a risk because you're trying to fill out the car. That's why car rental places don't want to rent to anybody under the age of 25. They're waiting for you to get your act together before they rent a car to you, because you're still figuring it out as you get older. It's the same thing when it comes to being at risk for trafficking. Just developmentally, you at risk because somebody might say, I don't think that dude's good for you. You can't tell me what to do. He loves me, whatever it is. You're taking that risk because you're trying to make these decisions on your own. However, what I will say is the majority of victims or people at risk for trafficking have experienced some form of significant trauma, abuse, marginalization, which resulted in emotional or psychological or even economic economic vulnerabilities that are used by the trafficker to manipulate them into sex, or that put them at risk for that. So I believe Sherry earlier said sometimes when someone's been sexually abused, it's like they got a target on their head. Or I think Nia was saying, you know, on Greenmount and these other places where people need money, like you're desperate and you'll do anything. And I see Naeem had a question or a comment. So go ahead, Naeem.
The stuff you said right now is very powerful, and I'm glad that to hear you are saying this stuff. Like I want to elaborate on from a male's viewpoint of how males or use money to females and stuff like that. From my perspective, that often happens because when they get rejected from females, they feel like money is the bait. It's like you it's like me as catching a deer, but I got the meat right here. That's how the process goes, and I feel like that's unnecessary. Like if you and it's crazy because not only that happens, children their children getting taken away. So I definitely agree with you saying, especially with the sharing private photos part. That happens all the time. Cause like I said before, like be mindful who you put in your circle and who is around you, because you can never know what they do. They probably be nice, but you'll never know. I'm telling you.
Yep. Thank you, Naeem. Thank you. And when you talk about, I like how you said about, the young men who are like, money is like their last option if they don't, if it's like, if they turn them down or whatever. But the other thing to think about, money wouldn't be a part of the issue if people weren't desperate in poverty. So like, if I don't have money, you dangling that money is a big deal. But if I got it, I'm like, what do I need your money for? Like if we were all fine economically, men wouldn't need to dangle that money, and the women or the other, or young men or LGBTQ youth wouldn't want the money. So it still goes back to like economic vulnerabilities that are existing in our community. What I will say in terms of ages, at least, anybody can be trafficked. However, typically when they are identified, not when they start, but typically when they're identified by either CPS or community notices something's wrong, or the police or whatever, they tend to be between the ages of 15 and 17. But that doesn't mean they started at 15 to 17. And sometimes people say, oh, they're 15 to 17, I don't have to worry until they're 15. No, they're vulnerable at 12. Like the grooming is going to start at 12, 11, 10 maybe. You just don't figure out that that's what's happened to me until I'm 15. And so you got to really think about that. Some other things that put youth or other risk factors, like if you see that somebody's running away from home or homeless, those are definitely, risk factors, because either something's happening at home that they're running away from so that they don't get trafficked, or when they end up on the streets because they've run away and they're homeless, then people approach them and either groom them or they're forced into survival sex situations because of that. Having that history of child abuse, neglect, maltreatment, sex abuse, like, especially if it's untreated, especially if, some people are abused as children, the family figures out what's going on, they get them into therapy, they deal with the issues, they're not vulnerable. So, which is why sometimes when people say, well, everybody who's sex abuse doesn't become a prostitute, why is that? And I'm like, number one, child prostitutes don't exist. Number two, the reason is because they didn't deal with it, and now they're vulnerable to someone who is really working on what happened to them. But I think Mark.
Can I add something?
Okay, yeah. Yes, Sherry, and I think I saw Mark had a question too.
That goes back to Miss Nia Jones, when she talked about intersectionality, the overlap. Sometimes individuals are able to push past because they do have loving families and they do have a strong support system. And also when you talk about that, and so you're looking at it's not looking at the child as a whole, or the victim as a whole person, not just that one piece, because we're not just one experience. We're multiple experiences, and it all comes together in addition to where we come from and our economical backgrounds and things. Mm-hmm. So it's like you have to look at do a holistic approach when handling these individuals.
Exactly. Thank you. Another thing that I wanted to mention was drugs, substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cocaine, crack, just substances in general. Substances play a part, and it's two different ways. So of course we got like the stereotypical, what you are probably used to seeing in movies or TV or what have you. Somebody's on drugs and they're like, I'll do this for you if you give me some more drugs or whatever. Like, you have that, like where someone is already addicted, and as they become more and more addicted, they will do anything to get more drugs, including sex trafficking or labor trafficking. So you have that where they're already addicted, possibly. But, I bring this up because that would be like if you already know someone's been using drugs. But sometimes you see someone who's never touched it, who you thought would never use drugs, and all of a sudden they're starting to use drugs more, and they really hadn't been around it or what have you. And instead of they already proceeded and they had it, it's actually a sign that they're being trafficked. Because what happens is traffickers can use the drugs to control them, or if they're already in the situation, like if they got them deep in the situation, they might start using drugs after all as a coping mechanism. Like imagine somebody got you doing, it doesn't, like in this case, we're talking sex trafficking, but think about your favorite thing to do, like your literal favorite thing to do. And you love doing it. Okay, exactly. Grilled cheese or whatever. Let's say you like to eat grilled cheese, right? And it's your favorite thing and you love it and it's all cool. But now I'm gonna tell you, you know what? You make a really good grilled cheese. For 20 out of 24 hours in a day, I need you to make me 5 grilled cheese. And that's it. That's all I want you to do for every day. Is it you doing this over and over and over and over and over again. you're like, dang, I need a break from this grilled cheese for a minute. Let me take a hit to get my mind right. And then I go back to making this grilled cheese. Like literally, exactly. By the time you're done, you're going to hate grilled cheese. And the reason I bring up that in terms of it being your favorite thing, is because especially when it comes to sex trafficking, because I'm a sex educator by training, sex is normal. And when it goes back to what I was saying about taking risks as adolescents, that's one of those things that people take risks. It's like, I want to have new experiences. I want to meet people. I want to do this. I want to do that. Sex is normal. But what happens when someone is sex trafficked, something that is a normal part of human existence becomes something that you hate. It becomes something that is evil to you, even though it's normal. And I want to bring that up because eventually someone might want to have sex again after they come out of the situation. And if you have friends who you know have been in trafficking situations or returning or what have you, you need to keep that in mind as well, because they eventually might want to have sex again. It might be, a year or two from now, maybe it's somebody that you start dating who discloses to you that this was in their past. You got to understand that this is something that you would work through together as a part of a relationship, because they no longer want to be triggered by trafficking. They've moved on, but it's still a part of their body. It's still a part of their body. And so we got to think through that as well. I think that's all I'm going to jump into in terms of like sharing from jump, but I'll just take whatever questions you have left. And I think I saw another question. So was it Mark?
Hey, yes. It's Mark Quay.
Oh, I like that name.
I know most of us Black people, once we see something that's not right, we automatically say, let me mind my business, or let me pay that no mind. And some people might report it or say something about it, but like I've seen it myself, some people just don't pay it no mind. Mm-hmm. So what should we do when we see somebody getting human trafficked? What should we say? And how will we actually know they're getting human trafficked? Is it like a certain tattoo they have or something?
So the second question is, there may be a tattoo, there may not be a tattoo. Like there's not a specific tattoo. I will say if there are tattoos, sometimes there are different tattoos that mean that you belong to a different trafficker, but sometimes there are no tattoos at all. So like something like that isn't really, in terms of how you would know, I would say if you see someone who ain't had no money yesterday, who all of a sudden got tons of cash, who have a lot of hotel key cards, like that one is always like, I know your mama didn't go, y'all didn't go on vacation. You can't afford to just go hang out in a hotel, but all of a sudden you got a bunch of hotel key cards. Like little things like that make you wonder what's happening. We tend to see in my team, we use 3 C's. So it's be compassionate, be cautious, and make the call. So being compassionate is literally just be compassionate, understand that this person, they might be defensive. They might not want to be like, you might come up and be like, yo, is something going on? I think something, you might be trafficked. You don't want to, like, you want to try to make sure that if this was your sister, if this was your brother, if this was your mother, like, how would you approach them and talk to them from a place of compassion? Like, I think I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. Like those kind of I statements, like instead of walking up to them like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why are you with him? Like literally come from a place of compassion first. The next thing we say is be cautious. You might not want to straight up say, I think you being trafficked. I'm gonna call the police on you. Like you literally want to be as cautious as possible, but you do want to make the call. Now for young people, like for adults, especially those like teachers or what have you that I know who are what we call mandated reporters. Like if they identify something, they are required to report it. It's a little bit different when you are a minor because it's harder sometimes for you to make calls, but there is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. If you as a child aren't comfortable calling CPS yourself, then I would consider going to a trusted adult, a teacher, a counselor, a guidance counselor, something like that, to tell them what you're thinking and have them, because they are mandated reporters, make that phone call. If you don't feel comfortable making that phone call to an agency such as CPS or the police. But those are the three things that we tell you to do. Thank you, Shamir, because I was just about to do your little dance, because the National Human Trafficking Hotline is 888-3737-888. And it's so because now that Shamir taught me that dance, I can't think of the number without the dance. But yes, but be compassionate, be cautious, make the call. If you think somebody's being trafficked, that's what you do. Those are the 3 C's. Are there any other questions? Because I don't know if I missed any when I was still talking.
Nadine, one thing, and
yes, Lauren.
You could be anonymous. You don't have to give your name or anything. You could just call it in.
Yes, on the National Human Trafficking Hotline, yes. It's you could be anonymous, you can call it in. Specifically, I was saying if you aren't comfortable calling like a CPS type number, but definitely call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So, any other questions?
Oh, and as Shamir put in there, you can text Be Free at 233-733.
Yes. And if you I don't know, I mean, if outside ever opens and we ever get back on like high school campuses or whatever, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has little like business card size stuff and little, like the little key cards that you carry around for the grocery. They have little ones that size that you can even hand out to people so that they have the number on it.
No, Nadine, that's not us. That's DHS.
No. Because I've ordered them from the National Human Trafficking Hotline before.
Not the hotline. It's from Homeland Security, DHS.
Okay. HSI, Homeland Security. Yeah. When you said DHS, I'm like, that's not DHS. DHS being child welfare. You meant okay. Yeah. Homeland Security. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I was like, I know I ordered them. Thank you, Homeland Security. But it's little cards you can hand out. Literally, you can hook it on your keychain so you have it all the time. So I don't know if there are any other questions, but Ania, I hope that's what you needed, what you wanted.
That was perfect. This turned out perfect. I'm so grateful for everybody who participated and the conversations in the chat, everyone who presented. Like, this was really good. Like, for our first event, I feel like we even got some statistics in here, because I even learned some things for being in my event. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, Miss McKenzie, you can share your question.
I know the presenters are still on, but my question for the presenters is, what is one thing that you would advise youth, or you want to tell youth that they can walk away and do today after learning about human trafficking, for all the presenters?
I'll go first. And I don't know why I just feel emotional right now. But my thought process is, when you doing the work, operate out of love, and know that if you're talking about it, it's in the room, and you'll be in spaces with adults who have experienced the same thing as well as sexual abuse. And so when you encounter people, you always want to see them with your heart and not with the physical, because when we show up in the room, sometimes we bring out stuff in the room. And so what you want to do is you just want to always show compassion. And the question is not what's wrong with that person. The question is what happened to that person. And so that's all I have to say.
I'll go next. I would say, as a young person, one of the things that people tend to forget, because truth be told, once you get past a certain age, sometimes you forget what being a young person was like. But I would say go with your gut. Like, seriously, go with your gut, because especially because you're at the age where you're trying to figure the world out. So sometimes you're like, well, maybe it's because I don't understand things yet or what have you. But if it really is looking wrong, go with your gut. Don't doubt yourself. If you think there's something, if you think that your friends, your family member of whatever, if something tells you something is wrong, go with your gut. And the reason I say that is because when I was a teenager, one of the things that people kind of accept more now existing, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, like, it wasn't even a crime when I was a teenager. And it's like a major crime now. Everybody understands it. But when I was younger, you would see it and you'd be like, well, I don't know what to do. It looks wrong to me, but no. And how many times do people not call things in because they didn't go with their gut? Go with your gut. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Go back to being compassionate about it, but recognize that it's wrong. Go with your gut. Don't doubt yourself just because you're young and you don't know if you know better yet.
I would say, going back to that philosophy of Ubuntu, and I am because we are, and know that that goes throughout the whole process. So for prevention, that it's not time to turn away and say, well, I'm not in that, so I don't need to worry about it. But if you see something, talk to your friends and say, I'm a little concerned, whatever. For treatment, making sure that, if you see somebody who would benefit from going to therapy or a support group, you can be an advocate and support them in finding that. Contact other people, even if you don't know, you can say, well, I know somebody who knows, so let me call them. And then healing that, when there's the sort of Eurocentric model where it's all about, well, individualism, this is a collective healing that needs to happen. And so many people are impacted by this, whether personally or having friends and family who've experienced it. So trying as much as possible to, support groups like Not for Sale and bringing people together to heal together, because we're all connected.
I guess I'll go. So for me, what I'll say is young people support each other. Be your brother and your sister's keeper. Advocate for each other. We understand that this world is so fluid now, and especially with all the things that I would not want to be a teenager right now. I would not survive it. And y'all are doing a phenomenal job as young people. So I would say continue to support each other. Don't be afraid to advocate. Advocate for each other. Advocate. Speak up. Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable in the situation. Don't be, if one person says no, talk to somebody else. Ask again. And no question is a bad question, a wrong question. It just hasn't been answered. Just ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to others, because there's some things that we still don't know. That's what I would say.
Thank y'all so much. And we call those Jews and heart smiles, and y'all dropped mega jewels. It was so powerful. Like, I guess will be for everyone in the chat and who's on the Zoom call will be like, Miss Sherry tells me this all the time, like, be gentle with yourself. And like, I had to learn that for me as well. And, starting this whole organization and what I've been through, but when I was starting it was just like, I really did have to be gentle with myself. When I started creating this program, my aunt passed away. And like, my family and I are big believers on like education and helping youth and loving on one another. And what this event was, like, to spread awareness, but also spread love to one another. And that's why I had Black Mental Health Alliance. That's why I had Dr. K from University of Maryland. That's why I had Miss Lauren and Miss Sherry, and like even our special guest Shamira McKenzie, because like I met her in Cecil County for this human trafficking web seminar, and like she was really like so powerful. Her story was like so touching and inspiring, and I'm so grateful for Dr. Carr, because like she was hitting on some points, like she was on it. And I'm just so grateful for everyone who's supporting Not For Sale. This is my mommy in the background. So I'm just so grateful how well this event went out. And I'm thankful for my team, and want to shout out Miss Joni for letting us use her YouTube channel for us to hold this event. And just thank y'all again. And we're going to have more events coming up. This is just the beginning. So I really hope that y'all tune in, and, you know, just more like having the support that I have right now is more than anything I can ask for. And this event was such a great success. And so if anyone else wanna my team, y'all can drop y'all jewels, because y'all know what the expectation is. So I'm ready. So drop y'all jewels. We here, y'all.
I guess I can go first. Remember, like Anir said, you're not for sale. You're not for sale. Who said who they could buy you or they could sell you? You're not a price tag. You're not a product. You're not for sale. That's my jewel for today.
My jewel is, remember, with rain comes sunshine. You are never ever going to be in that dark space forever, because that rain will always bring out the sun, the birds, the bees, the flowers. So, look at life in a positive outcome.
I would say focus on positivity. Every day when you wake up, just put a smile on your face and just like, think about all the good things. Like don't think about nothing negative, because it's not gonna help you now or later. So yeah, remain positive, have that positive mindset. And yeah, you're not for sale.
My jewel is just stay educated and stay aware. Because like everybody said, you're not for sale and you have control over your own life.
So I guess we're gonna bring back Miss Joni, and we're gonna end this event. We love y'all. Remember, you are not for sale. We'll be, if y'all want any more information, our Instagram is not for sale youth be more. Our email is notforsaleyouth@gmail.com. My phone number is 443-802-6771. Feel free to reach out, and have a great rest of your Saturday afternoon. And remember, you are not for sale.
Thank you so much to all of our guests. Y'all, was that not a powerful and amazing event, yo? Like, I know that the conversation was heavy, but just the fact that Ania had the courage to be able to have this conversation and to bring people together, specifically for young people who are watching. Yo, I really want you to connect with Ania, and to use that as the model for following your dreams, for going after something. And I've had personal conversations with Ania, so I already know what some of the backlash and some of the comments were when she said that she was taking on this topic. So to really see her do it is truly amazing, truly aspiring, and it is confirmation that you guys can do anything that you put your mind to and that you're willing to work for. So thank you so much, Ania, for this. We don't normally do Saturday events, but I had to make an exception for this one. So we'll see you at the next event then. All right.
See y'all.
See
Good night,
y'all.
y'all.